I have seen many cases where people believe the biggest piece of evidence is the one that will reveal the truth, a document, a recording, a witness. But sometimes the smallest detail can expose the biggest lie. I remember one case where both sides walked into my courtroom arguing over a damaged car. One person claimed it was a simple accident. The other claimed it was an intentional act. Both had their stories prepared. Both believed they knew exactly what happened, but then I noticed something nobody else paid attention to. A tiny scratch on the side of the car, a scratch that looked meaningless, a scratch that everyone ignored except me, because that one small mark revealed a detail that completely changed the entire case. Before I take you deeper into this courtroom story, make sure you are subscribed for more dramatic cases like this. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now and comment below where you are watching from. Stay until the end, because the smallest detail in this case uncovered a truth that shocked everyone in the courtroom and proved that one tiny mistake can reveal a much bigger lie. Now let me take you back to the beginning of the case. The dispute between Melissa Carter and Robert Hayes appeared simple at first. Melissa claimed Robert intentionally damaged her luxury vehicle after a disagreement between them. She was asking for thousands of dollars in repair costs. According to Melissa, Robert became angry, approached her parked car, and caused damage to the driver's side door. Robert denied everything. He claimed the damage was already there before the incident and that Melissa was using the situation to blame him for something he did not do. When I first reviewed the case file, I noticed something unusual. Both sides had photographs. Both sides had explanations, but neither side had the one thing that mattered most: a clear understanding of how the damage actually happened. And that is usually where the truth begins, not with who sounds more convincing, with what the evidence actually shows. I remember Melissa walking into my courtroom that morning. She looked confident. She carried herself like someone who had already decided she was going to win. She brought repair estimates, printed photographs, and several messages between herself and Robert. Everything was organized. Everything looked prepared. Across from her sat Robert. He looked much less confident. He held a folder in his hands and kept looking through the same few pages repeatedly. I noticed that. People who are lying often worry about what they will say. People who are telling the truth often worry whether anyone will believe them. Melissa's attorney began first. Your Honor, my client suffered thousands of dollars in damage because the defendant acted out of anger. I looked toward Robert. Did you damage the vehicle? No, Your Honor. Did you have any reason to damage it? No, Melissa immediately reacted. She shook her head. That caught my attention. Sometimes people respond emotionally before they respond verbally. I turned toward her. Mrs. Carter, you will have your opportunity. She stopped. Then I looked at the evidence. The photographs showed a long scratch along the driver's side door. At first glance, it appeared to support Melissa's claim. A damaged car, a disagreement, an accused person, a simple story. But simple stories are not always accurate stories. I asked Melissa, when did this damage happen? The night after our argument. Did anyone see him damage the vehicle? No. Did anyone hear anything? No. Then what makes you believe he did it? She answered quickly, because he was angry. I paused. Interesting. Very interesting. Anger is a feeling. I looked toward Robert. Why does she believe you did this? He looked uncomfortable. Because we had an argument. What was the argument about? He hesitated, then answered. Money. Explain. Robert said Melissa had borrowed money from him for a business expense, and they disagreed about repayment. Melissa immediately interrupted. That has nothing to do with my car. I looked at her. Maybe. I paused. Maybe it does. because in many cases, the reason behind a conflict matters, not because it proves someone did something, but because it explains why people make certain claims. I returned to the photographs. There was something bothering me, the scratch, not the size, not the cost, the direction. I zoomed in on the photograph. Everyone else had been looking at how much damage existed. I was looking at how the damage happened, and that difference matters. I looked toward both parties. Who inspected the vehicle? Melissa raised her hand. The repair shop, did they inspect it before or after you filed this claim? After. Interesting. Very interesting. I looked back at the photograph. A tiny detail stood out. The scratch had a pattern, a direction, a starting point, and based on that direction, the damage did not look like someone standing beside the car and dragging an object across the door. It looked like something completely different, something Melissa never mentioned. I looked toward her. Mrs. Carter, she looked up. Did you tell the repair shop exactly how this damage happened? Yes. What did you tell them? She answered confidently. That someone scratched the side while walking past it. I looked at the photograph again, then back at her, because that answer created a problem, a very big problem. The scratch she described could not have happened the way she claimed, and nobody in that courtroom had noticed. Nobody except me. I kept my eyes on the photograph in front of me. The courtroom was focused on the amount of damage, the repair cost, the accusations, but I was focused on something much smaller, the direction of the scratch, because after years on the bench, I have learned one important lesson: people can create stories. They can create explanations. They can even create convincing emotions. But physical evidence has its own language, and that language does not change just because someone tells a different story. I looked toward Melissa Carter. Mrs. Carter, you said someone walking past the vehicle caused this scratch. Yes. With what? She paused. Something sharp. Do you know what? No. I nodded. Then I looked toward the photograph again. The scratch started low near the front door and moved upward toward the back. A strange direction, a strange pattern. I asked, how tall are you? Melissa looked surprised by the question. 5'6". And where was the scratch located when you first saw it? About halfway up the door. Interesting. Very interesting. I turned toward Robert. Mr. Hayes, did you ever touch this vehicle? No. Did you inspect the damage yourself? Yes. What did you notice? He looked at the photograph. The scratch didn't make sense. I looked at him. Explain. He took a breath. I worked around cars for years, and if someone was standing beside the vehicle and dragged something across the door, the mark would have looked different. Melissa immediately reacted. You are not an expert. I looked toward her. Mrs. Carter. She stopped. I turned back to Robert. Continue. He pointed toward the photograph. The pressure marks are uneven. The beginning is deeper than the end, and the angle suggests the object was moving upward, not sideways. I looked at the image again. That was exactly what caught my attention. A person walking past a parked car usually creates a straight or horizontal mark, but this scratch showed something else, a movement, a motion. A person holding something at a certain angle. I looked toward Melissa. Did you take this photograph yourself? Yes. Before repairs? Yes. Did you send it to anyone? Yes. Who? My insurance company. I nodded. Did the insurance company inspect the vehicle? Yes. What did they say? Melissa looked away briefly. They approved the repair. That answer was interesting, because approval of payment does not always mean approval of a story. I explained, a repair approval does not automatically prove who caused the damage. Melissa's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client is simply trying to recover the cost of damage caused by the defendant. I nodded. That is what we are determining. I looked toward the repair estimate, then I noticed another detail. The estimated repair included replacing the entire door panel, but the photograph showed only surface damage. I looked toward Melissa. Why was the entire panel replaced? Because the shop recommended it. Did they say the door was structurally damaged? No. Did they say the door could not be repaired? No. Interesting, very interesting. The numbers were beginning to tell a different story. The damage, the repair, the accusation. Nothing was matching perfectly. I looked at Melissa's messages with Robert. One message stood out. It was sent the night before she reported the damage. The message from Melissa said, "You will regret refusing to help me." I read it twice. Then I looked toward her, Mrs. Carter. She looked up. "What did you mean by this message?" She immediately answered, "I was angry at Mr. Hayes." "Yes, because of the money dispute." "Yes," I nodded. Anger alone does not prove someone caused damage. But anger combined with missing details creates questions. And questions are exactly what a courtroom is designed to answer. I turned back toward the photograph. The scratch was still there, small, almost meaningless, but it was becoming the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. Because everyone else saw damage, I saw a contradiction. And contradictions are often where the truth begins. I looked toward Robert. "You said you had something else to show the court." He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "What is it?" He opened his folder. Inside was a photograph, not of the damaged car, but of the car before the alleged incident, taken earlier that same day. I looked at it carefully. Then I looked back at Melissa, because in that photograph there was something nobody expected to see. The scratch was already there, but not in the same place Melissa claimed it happened. And that meant the damage everyone was arguing about might not have been caused by Robert at all. I looked carefully at the photograph Robert had placed in front of me. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary picture, a car, a parking area, nothing unusual. But after looking closer, I noticed something important. The scratch was already there, before the argument, before the accusation, before Melissa claimed Robert damaged the vehicle. I placed the photograph beside the original damage picture. Two images, two different moments. One very important truth: the damage Melissa blamed on Robert had existed before the incident she described. I looked toward Melissa, Mrs. Carter. She sat up. "Can you explain this?" She looked at the photographs. For the first time that morning, her confidence disappeared. "I don't know. Interesting. Very interesting. A few minutes earlier, she was certain. She knew who caused the damage. She knew why it happened. She knew exactly what she wanted the court to believe. But now, faced with a photograph that challenged her story, she had no explanation. I turned toward Robert. "Where did you get this photograph?" He answered, "I took it the same day." "Why?" "Because I had noticed the scratch before we argued." "Did you tell anyone?" I told Melissa. "When?" "Before the argument." I looked back at Melissa. "Is that true?" She remained silent. Her attorney quickly stood. "Your Honor, my client may not remember every detail from that day." I looked at him. "That is possible." Then I looked back at Melissa. But forgetting a detail and changing a story are two different things. The courtroom became quiet because that was the real issue, not whether the car had a scratch, not whether repairs were needed. The issue was whether Melissa was telling the truth about when that damage happened. I reviewed the timeline. Morning. The scratch existed. Afternoon. Melissa and Robert argued about money. Evening. Melissa reported the damage and blamed Robert. The timeline was becoming clear. I looked toward Melissa. "Why didn't you mention that the vehicle already had a scratch?" She answered quickly. "Because I didn't think it mattered. I paused. Interesting, very interesting. It mattered a great deal because the entire foundation of her case depended on one claim, that Robert caused new damage. But if the damage already existed, then her accusation had a serious problem. I turned toward the repair estimate. Mrs. Carter, when you took the vehicle for repair, did you tell the shop there was previous damage? No. Why? Because I believed it was connected. Connected to what? The argument. I nodded. Again, the argument. Everything kept returning to the argument, but anger does not create evidence. A disagreement does not prove someone committed an action. I looked toward Robert. Mr. Hayes, did you threaten Mrs. Carter during the argument? No. Did you say anything about damaging her vehicle? No. Did you send any messages after the argument? Yes. What did they say? He handed over his phone records. One message stood out, sent shortly after the argument. I am upset, but I would never hurt you or damage your property. I read it carefully. Then I looked toward Melissa. Did you receive this message? Yes. Did you respond? She hesitated. No, that silence mattered because sometimes people do not respond because they have nothing to say. And sometimes they do not respond because the answer would expose too much. I looked back at the evidence, the scratch, the photograph, the timeline, the messages. A pattern was forming. But I still needed one thing, tit, because a mistake and a deliberate lie are not the same thing. I turned toward Melissa. Mrs. Carter, after receiving this message, why did you continue with the claim? She looked uncomfortable. I wanted my repairs covered. That is understandable. I paused. But why accuse Mr. Hayes specifically? She looked down. No answer. I leaned back. This was the moment where many cases change, not because someone confesses, but because their explanation stops making sense. I looked toward the photograph one more time. The tiny scratch that everyone ignored had already answered the biggest question. Robert did not create the original damage, but another question remained. If Melissa knew the scratch existed before the argument, why did she try so hard to make everyone believe it happened afterward? The answer was hidden somewhere else, and I was about to discover it. Because sitting inside Melissa's own evidence folder was a document she thought would support her case. Instead, it was about to reveal the one mistake she never realized she made. I looked down at the document sitting inside Melissa Carter's evidence folder. It was something she had submitted herself, something she believed would strengthen her case. But after reviewing the details, I realized it might do the exact opposite. I turned the page slowly. It was the official repair inspection report, the document that was supposed to prove the damage happened after the argument. But evidence does not always support the person who presents it. Sometimes it reveals what they hoped nobody would notice. I looked at the report carefully, the inspection date, the damage description, the repair recommendation. Then I noticed something, a small note written near the bottom of the page. I read it again. Then I looked toward Melissa, Mrs. Carter. She looked up. Did you read this entire report before submitting it? She hesitated. Yes. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the note I had found was not hidden. It was right there. The repair technician had written, existing surface marks were observed. Exact time of damage cannot be confirmed. The courtroom became silent. I looked at Melissa. Did you see this statement? She looked uncomfortable. I may have missed it, a convenient phrase. I have learned that people often notice the parts of evidence that help them. The parts that hurt their story somehow become invisible, I continued. So the repair technician did not confirm that Mr. Hayes caused the damage. No. The technician did not confirm when the damage happened. No. The technician only confirmed that damage existed. Yes. I nodded. That was important. because the entire case was built around a conclusion that the evidence never actually proved Melissa was asking the court to move from "there is damage" to "Robert caused the damage." But that distance between those two statements is where proof is required. I looked toward Robert. "Mr. Hayes, did you ever admit causing any damage?" "No." "Did you ever offer to pay for repairs?" He looked down. "Yes, why?" "Because I wanted to end the argument." I looked at him. "Did you offer because you caused the damage?" "No." "Why didn't you explain that?" "I did." "To whom?" "To Melissa." I looked back at the messages. There it was. Another detail, another piece that connected the story. A message from Melissa after Robert offered to pay. "Finally, you are accepting responsibility." I read it carefully. Then I looked at her. "Mrs. Carter, why did you say he was accepting responsibility?" She answered, "Because he offered money." I nodded. Interesting, very interesting. But offering money after a disagreement is not the same as admitting guilt. Sometimes people pay because they want peace, not because they are responsible. I turned toward Melissa. "Did you ever ask Robert why he offered to pay?" "No." "Why?" She did not answer because she already had the conclusion she wanted. She was not searching for the truth. She was searching for confirmation. I looked at the scratch photograph again. That tiny mark had started this entire process, and now it was revealing something much bigger. The scratch was not just evidence about a car. It was evidence about a story. It's a story that changed depending on what Melissa needed people to believe. I turned toward her attorney. "Do you have any additional evidence showing Mr. Hayes caused new damage?" He stood. "Your Honor, the timing speaks for itself." I looked at him. "Does it?" He paused. I continued. "Timing can create suspicion, but suspicion is not proof." He sat down. The courtroom remained quiet because everyone was beginning to see the same thing. The case was not about whether the car was damaged. It was about whether Melissa could prove who caused it. And so far, she could not. I looked toward Melissa. "Mrs. Carter, one question." She looked up. "If Robert did not cause this damage, who did?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. That pause was important because the person making an accusation should usually know the answer to that question. But Melissa didn't, and that told me something. The case was changing. The person who came into my courtroom asking for justice was now the person who had to explain the missing pieces in her own story. But there was still one thing I wanted to examine. The photograph Robert provided, the one showing the scratch before the argument, because there was a detail in that image nobody had discussed yet. Something in the background, something that revealed where the car had actually been parked that day. And when I looked closer, I realized the location itself was about to expose the final part of the story. I looked again at the photograph Robert had provided. Everyone in the courtroom had been focused on one thing: the scratch, the mark on the car, the damage that started this entire dispute. But I was looking at something else, the background, because sometimes the strongest evidence is not the thing everyone is pointing at, it is the thing everyone ignores. I zoomed in on the image. Behind the vehicle was a building entrance, a security camera, and a visible timestamp from the parking area. I looked at the date, then I looked at the time. Interesting, very interesting, because the photograph was taken hours before Melissa claimed the damage happened. I turned toward Melissa. "Mrs. Carter." She looked up. "Where was your vehicle parked when you first noticed the damage?" She answered carefully, "Outside my office." "Which office?" She gave the address. I looked back at the photograph. The location matched. I continued. "Was there a security camera facing that parking area?" Melissa hesitated. "I believe so." "Interesting, very interesting." A person who believes they were wronged usually wants every possible piece of evidence examined, but Melissa did not seem interested in that camera. She seemed interested in only one version of events. I turned toward her. "Did you request the security footage?" "No." "Why not?" She looked uncomfortable. I didn't think it was necessary. I paused. "Not necessary." The same person who claimed someone intentionally damaged her expensive vehicle did not check the one thing that could clearly show what happened. That was unusual. I looked toward Robert. "Did you know about the camera?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you request footage?" "No." "Why?" "Because I did not know it existed." That answer mattered because it showed something important. Robert was not building a story around evidence he controlled. He was responding to the evidence that appeared. I turned toward the court clerk. "Do we have access to the security footage?" The clerk checked the records. A few moments later, the answer came. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom became silent. Melissa's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough, I noticed. The footage was brought forward. The screen turned on. The parking area appeared. The timestamp matched the day in question. We watched for several minutes. Nothing unusual happened. Cars entered. People walked by. Then the moment arrived. A vehicle stopped near Melissa's car. A person walked past, and something important happened. The person did not approach the car from the direction Melissa described. The scratch was not created by someone walking beside the vehicle. It happened another way. A delivery cart brushed against the side of the car while being moved through the parking area. The courtroom became completely quiet. I paused the video. I looked toward Melissa. "Mrs. Carter." She stared at the screen. "Did you know about this?" "No." "Did you see this happen?" "No." "Then why did you accuse Mr. Hayes?" She looked down. No answer. And that silence told me more than any argument could, because the evidence had now answered the question. Robert did not damage the vehicle. The scratch was not caused during the argument. The damage existed before the accusation, and the person who filed the claim had ignored every detail that challenged her story. But there was still one thing I needed to understand. A mistake is one thing. A false accusation is another. I looked at Melissa. "Mrs. Carter, when you reported this damage, did you truly believe Mr. Hayes caused it?" She remained quiet. Then she finally said, "I thought it was possible." I nodded. There it was. The difference between a belief and a fact. A person can suspect, a person can wonder. But a person cannot destroy another person's reputation based only on a guess. I reviewed the evidence one final time. The original photograph, the repair report, the messages, the security footage, the tiny scratch that started everything. That scratch had revealed the truth. Not because it was large, not because it was expensive, because it told a story Melissa did not expect anyone to question. I looked toward Robert. He sat quietly, no celebration, no anger, just relief. Because being falsely blamed for something you did not do creates a burden most people never understand. Then I turned back toward Melissa. The case was almost over, but before I delivered my decision, I wanted to ask one final question, a question that would reveal whether she understood what had really happened. "Mrs. Carter," she looked at me. "Do you still believe Mr. Hayes was responsible?" The courtroom waited, because her answer would determine everything. I looked at Melissa Carter after asking my final question. "Do you still believe Mr. Hayes was responsible?" The courtroom became completely silent. Because sometimes the most important moment in a case is not when evidence is revealed. It is when a person has to decide whether they will finally accept the truth. Melissa looked down at the photographs. The scratch, the repair report, the security footage. Everything that once supported her accusation had now shown something different. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know." I nodded. That answer mattered. Because earlier that morning, Melissa was certain. She walked into my courtroom knowing exactly what she wanted everyone to believe. But now, after the evidence was examined, certainty had disappeared. And that is often what happens when assumptions meet facts. I turned toward the evidence table. This case was never really about a scratch on a car. The scratch was only the beginning. The real issue was what happened when someone decided a suspicion was enough to accuse another person. I reviewed the evidence one final time. The original photograph proved the damage existed before the argument. The repair report showed that the timing of the damage could not be confirmed. The messages showed there was a disagreement between Melissa and Robert. The security footage revealed the actual cause of the scratch. A delivery cart, not Robert. The evidence was clear. I looked toward Robert. Mr. Hayes, he looked up. You were accused of damaging property based on an assumption. He nodded. But the evidence showed that assumption was wrong. I turned toward Melissa. Mrs. Carter. She looked at me. A person can be angry. A person can be disappointed. A person can believe something happened. But belief alone is not proof. The courtroom remained quiet because that was the lesson of the entire case. The damage was real. The scratch existed. The repair was needed. But the person responsible was not the person Melissa chose to blame. I delivered my decision. Judgment is entered in favor of Robert Hayes. The room remained silent. Mrs. Carter's claim is dismissed. I continued. The evidence does not support the allegation that Mr. Hayes caused the damage. I placed the documents down. And the court cannot hold someone responsible simply because they were involved in a disagreement. Melissa lowered her eyes. The confidence she brought into the courtroom was gone, not because she lost a case, because she learned that a story built on assumptions cannot survive when evidence tells a different story. I looked towards Robert. You did the right thing by preserving the evidence. He nodded. Thank you, Your Honor, but I wanted him to understand something important. The photographs and records did not win the case by themselves. What mattered was that he did not give up when someone else controlled the louder story. Many people believe the truth always arrives dramatically. It does not. Sometimes the truth appears in a tiny scratch, a small mark, a detail that everyone else ignores. That is why evidence matters. Because the smallest thing can reveal the biggest mistake. As both sides left the courtroom, I thought about how easily this entire situation could have ended differently. A simple accusation, a simple assumption, a person blamed because the story sounded believable. But believable is not the same as true, and that is a lesson worth remembering. A person should never be judged by what seems obvious. They should be judged by what can be proven. This case proved that the truth is not always hidden in the biggest evidence. Sometimes the smallest detail can expose the biggest lie, because facts do not need to be loud to reveal what really happened. If this courtroom story reminded you that evidence matters and every person deserves to be heard, subscribe for more dramatic courtroom stories where the truth finally comes to light. Comment below and tell me what you would have done if you were sitting in that courtroom.